partner Alex and I stand in firm affirmation of the resolution. Law enforcement department staff should reflect the demographics of the community. The first observation are the definitions. The first definition we'll provide is law enforcement department staff. These are employees of police department and associated forces. This includes, for example, sheriffs, FBI, CIA, immigration police, etc. The second definition is that of reflect. According to our Oxford Dictionary, it is to show in a realistic and appropriate way. What this means is essentially an equal proportion to the population as much as possible. That means, of course, we're going to continue to fill all the available positions, but as much as possible, we'll have it reflect the demographics of the community. The next definition is demographics, which is categories people are sort of into, like race, gender, ethnicity, etc. The second observation is that the way mechanism you should use is net benefits, which means we evaluate which team has the most amount of impact for the most amount of people, because this provides the clearest bright line in a debate in which to choose the winner. Let's go ahead and move on to contention 1 of police brutality. Brutality rates right now are very high. There are lots of shootings from police that are specifically seen as wrongful in our community and abuse by police during arrests. There's additionally abusive and damaging searches and seizures and overall sexual assault. A lot of this is performed primarily by white males who are targeting other people, specifically Black men, women, and other women of color, and they're more likely to suffer from this type of police brutality because of all the unconscious biases that exist. We can see that people of diverse backgrounds empathize with victims of brutality and can relate. So they're less likely to be brutal and target minorities with brutality. Most are lots of individuals who are minorities or have these backgrounds have experiences themselves, and thus they're less likely to inflict it upon others. So overall, the impacts of this, we're going to see a decrease in the oppression and discrimination of these minority individuals because of an increase in this diversity. And for 2, overall, there increase suffering and death, because it's simply less likely that a person of color is going to be shooting and killing another person of color through the same unconscious bias that happens when white police officers often do that. This is in other situations besides just police. We can also see that if people see police being brutal, they think that they can attack minorities too with other hate crimes. We stop this. We're essentially stopping this cycle that's being perpetuated by the police in our society. The second contention is that of racial profiling. Right now, the United States is one of the highest prison populations in the world. We have the largest prison population in the world, even though we have a significantly smaller population in countries like China and India with virtually the same crime rate. What we can see is that minorities are specifically much more likely to be in prison. Let's look at the fact that 1 in 3 Black men should expect to be in jail or prison during his lifetime. Because of the police and this racial profiling, the majority of police officers right now are white because they're the majority of the population, but it's still not in proportion to the population. We can see they're more likely to assume that, for example, a Black male is selling drugs than a white male, and more likely to follow them and get them arrested simply because of these unconscious biases. They're also more likely to follow other minorities around and simply look at them and assume that they're more likely to be engaging in crime activity. So overall, what happens is when we have a staff that actually is representative of the population, we're going to have an overall increase in diversity, which generally leads to a decrease in bias for a few reasons. The first reason is that white individuals or more privileged individuals working alongside people of color or other minorities are more likely to be more educated about these issues, less likely to experience bias if they experience diversity in their workplace. And 2, these specifically minorities are less likely to do the racial profiling themselves because they've experienced it. They understand how not true racial profiling is, and they're simply less likely to have these same unconscious biases for this reason. So one of the impacts of this is we're going to be decreasing the incarceration gap. We're not necessarily saying more or less people will be imprisoned, but less people of color will be imprisoned unfairly in proportion to white people because we have simply less bias in the people who are actually doing the arrest themselves. You can also see this is going to be decreasing the rates of recidivism because if Black men are specifically more likely to be in prison and continually to be arrested by the police, then we're going to be overall eliminating this bias, which decreases the chance that people go to jail multiple times during their lifetime. The third contention is of diversity of department. Right now we can see diverse backgrounds lead to overall different perspectives and thoughts about how to handle certain situations, which leads to more discussion of different solutions to problems in the law enforcement sphere. You can see right now, in some places around the world, it's more like an echo chamber in the law department because there's always the people of privilege, the people with one viewpoint who are talking about all these things and solving problems in one way. However, we can see that monogamous departments wouldn't have even some of the thoughts that you have in more diverse areas because they're not surrounded by the same perspectives. And if people see themselves represented in police forces, they're more likely to have trust in the police and cooperate and respect them. We can see right now, police have a very negative view in American society. We can actually do something to change that by giving the respect that they should have and they could have if we were simply able to more diversity in these forces to better overall affect the United States population. So the impacts of this is essentially more effective law enforcement. If you have people who feel represented by their police, they're more likely to respect them. We're simply more likely to change the negative connotations we have of police because we see them as more fair. The fourth contention is that of surveillance. Right now we can see that many minority groups are specifically surveilled more than others. Let's look to Muslims, who have seen an increase in surveillance bias since 2011, and additionally Hispanics, who have seen this in relation to them being assumed potentially part of drug cartels. The way this essentially links to the resolution is we include all law enforcement, so for example the FBI, etc., who have these unconscious biases and are more likely to be surveilling minorities. And right now there is very little check back because we do not have this proportional reflection. However, when we have this proportional reflection, the people of color and people of different viewpoints are going to be in the actual staff. That means they're more likely to put a check on this bias, and they're less likely to target these minorities because they see that racial profiling is flawed. So overall, the impacts of this is just decreased racial profiling and decreased racism in the workplace because we're overall increasing this diversity, and that means we're going to be decreasing the oppression because minorities are less likely to actually be surveilled disproportionately just by being from a different background. So let's talk a little bit more about framing. Specifically under net benefits, when we prefer impacts of structural violence and oppression because these impacts are often ignored and swept under the rug. Examples of this are specifically racism and oppression and other types of isms that generally affect one certain group. And the reason why this is so important is because these issues are not focused on. And so at the end of the day, these are really what have the most impact on so many Americans who face this racial profiling and racial discrimination. And that's why I'm going to be voting AF. Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be two disadvantages, a counterplan, and then case and order framework on top. Everyone ready? Okay, so we're getting negation of the resolution that law enforcement department staff should reflect the demographics of the community. The first disadvantage is going to be scarcity. The uniqueness is that right now there is a shortage of police of any race. So looking specifically at the police departments around the United States, there's a general shortage. There's just not enough people to accurately cover the amount of people that are in the United States. And so what that means is that they're already accepting people who do not have enough training. So they're basically desperate for any sort of police to join their squad because they just don't have enough people to actually, enough people to accurately enforce the law. And so they're taking people who are not actually being trained appropriately. The link is that the plan increases the amount of police officers, law enforcement people as a whole. And that means is that you're not necessarily just looking at like purely like replacing a white person, but when you're looking at representing people proportionally, you're going to be adding people of color into the law enforcement agency, which is going to be what the plan is doing. And so what that means is you're taking a system that as currently is understaffed while still overflowing, is not able to accurately train people even while being understaffed. What this means, this is basically the internal link, is that you're furthering poor training and increases the likeliness of police brutality. When you're shuttling people through a system, because now not only are you desperate to take anyone who's coming in, but now you have to take in a certain quota of a certain race or certain ethnicity, then what that means is you're going to be picking the people not necessarily based on any sort of qualification, but based on did they sign up? Are there enough people right now that we're going to be able to meet this quota of law enforcement? Which is going to lead to the impact of first, you're going to see an increase in death of marginalized people. Why? Because the people aren't going to be accurately trained to deal with situations. We already see in the status quo that police are horrifically incapable of dealing with situations of kids, of people who are not armed and are just walking home from the convenience store. They're not able to deal with that situation. Imagine a world with less training for those police. That's just going to make things worse and worse and worse. So the way I want to clarify this impact is that you're decreasing training of all levels. So they make the arguments that I'll touch on later that what they're doing is they're allowing for there to be people of color who are going to check back on the violence that are put in the communities. But when they're decreasing the overall training level, even if those people of color aren't necessarily going to be inflicting danger onto the people, the white people who are getting even less training are going to be causing more dangers, which will basically just make that at best a zero-sum game. So you're going to see an impact, an increase in death of marginalized people, and overall decrease in safety. On to the second. which is going to be segregation. The uniqueness here is that people of color deal with severe police brutality. This is going to be something we all agree on, that was talked about extensively in the affirmations case, and that the police currently have organized schemes against them. You can look to Baltimore as a perfect example of this. Through basically admissions from 2 cops, they basically said that the police training involves giving them fake guns to plant on people if they happen to shoot someone who is unarmed. There are specific schemes that if you're going to join the police corps, you're going to join the police squad, then you're going to have to participate in these activities that are extremely detrimental to people of color. And the link there is that the plan marks areas where people of color can and cannot go. So when you're now having areas that are based on the population, the race of the people who are living there, you're going to have areas with predominantly black cops and predominantly white cops, and it's going to lead to where there's going to be specific areas where people of color feel comfortable going, and specific areas where they'll have absolutely no way of going into because they'll be surrounded by people who are quite literally out to get them. The internal link is this further entrenches people of color into impoverished areas. We already have spaces where they don't feel comfortable going places, and it's just only going to get worse. Because sure, they might feel comfortable in their community, but they're not going to be able to get out of there, and this leads to them not having access to key resources like education. If your school happens to be outside of the area where you're having more people of color, then now you're having kids having to go to school in situations where they're going to be surrounded by cops who are, like I said, quite literally out to get them. They're not going to be able to access key resources like they would be able to in the status quo. And the impact there is going to be a decrease in safety, a decrease in quality of life, and an increase in poverty. You're keeping people stuck in the areas where they're already struggling and not allowing them to have any chance of upward mobility, which gets us to the counterplan. Counterplan text is patrol officers should be disarmed of lethal weaponry. I'll read that again. Patrol officers should be disarmed of lethal weaponry. The advantage is going to be safety. The uniqueness here is that there have been over 300 police shootings this year. 300 people have been attacked by police, and the link is that the plan takes away the use of lethal force. We're taking away the ability for the cop based on any impulse from unconscious bias to just completely kill someone. They're still going to have defense mechanisms like tasers, but that they're not going to be able to quite literally just pull out a gun and kill someone in seconds based on internal racism. And the solvency is going to be that we're allowing for a safer existence for people of color. When looking to what's going to make things safer, you're going to see that getting rid of the weaponry that police use to target people of color is going to be much more effective than just putting more people of color in the area. When you're having, whether or not you're having more people of color in the area does not mean that you're going to be decreasing the amount of white people that have guns that can commit the amount of damage. If we had, it'll be much safer for there to be no guns available for police to use on people of color than it would be just to have like a few more black people who theoretically like teach them how to not be racist. And I'm going to get into that on their case. So the impact here is going to have an increase in quality of life. You're decreasing poverty. You're allowing for upward mobility because people aren't dying and aren't getting severely injured or having healthcare problems that they're not going to be able to pay their way out of. So that gets me on to the case. Onto their observation level, we're fine with their definitions. We're fine with their second observation, the weighing mechanism of death benefits, and we're also fine with the framework they talked about when we're looking at net benefits. We should prioritize structural violence and oppression because that's basically what the counterplan attempts to solve. So we're both trying to do the same thing. We're just going about it different ways. The first advantage they talked about police brutality. You can cross-apply the disadvantages that we ran there. They say diverse people are going to be less likely to be brutal. And just cross-apply the answer I already made that it's not just unconscious bias. Literally, people of color are going to be selected based on whether they buy into the system of committing these crimes and continuing the police brutality that happens. Not all people of color are just going to be 100% going to stop basically racism from happening. Like, look, like Ben Carson exists, right? Like, he's a black person who's like actively destroying urban housing development and making things worse for people of his own race. There'll just be people like that it's not like they're purposely trying to make things worse, but they're just going to be following the same logic. So then they say so you're not going to see an impact of decreasing oppression because it's just going to be the same, if not the worst. On to the second advantage of profiling, they say there's going to be people following people around. Again, that same stuff will happen because it's like you're getting basically processed through the police system. And they say white people will be less biased because they'll be around people of color. This also works the other way, right? If you're surrounded by a system of white supremacy, you're then going to have to default to that because you're going to be expected to defend the Blue Lives Matter stuff. Like, you're going to be expected to work in that way. It's not necessarily like, oh, all the white cops are just immediately going to understand how not to be racist. It's going to be way easier to make people act impulsively wrongly instead of uncovering institutional racism, right? The third advantage is diversity of the department. They talk about there's going to be more discussion. It's going to be an echo chamber. One, it's going to be super racist because the majority of them are white. They'll just silence black voices anyway. Like, there's no reason that they'll have any reason to like listen to anything that the black people are saying because there's just always going to be more of them, even if it's proportional. That doesn't mean that there's going to be any sort of way that's going to change anything. So that's you're not really changing the echo chamber. The impact is more effective law enforcement. That's also like there's not really an impact if like we look at law enforcement better. Like just like the perception of law enforcement being bad right now is a good thing because it's allowing us to run the kind of plan we want to change things. And their fourth advantage, talked about that basically that the staff are going to put a check on bias and they're including all law enforcement. And that, again, you can classify the answer like Ben Carson exists, like people of color aren't going to check back on that.
Good question. It's going to be the same order. Actually, I'll put the counter plan first, and then I'll do the rest of the next space in order. And then I'm going to be doing the affirmative space.
And you choose.
Is everyone ready? Okay, starting time now. Let's start off on their counterplan. The first response here is going to be a permutation. When the negative presents a counterplan in debate, they're supposed to present a counterplan that competes with the affirmative, meaning that they can't both happen in the same world. Because if they're just advocating for some other action that could be better than us, they could advocate for an infinite amount of things, like giving millions of dollars to charity or orphans, and that's maybe potentially better than our plan. The reason the counterplan exists is to provide an opportunity cost to the plan, saying if the plan happens, this other good thing will not be possible. However, they don't give you any reasons as to why the plan makes the counterplan impossible to happen. Thus, we're going to be saying that since the counterplan and the plan can both happen at the same time, in the same world, the counterplan is not a reason to vote against the affirmation because we're not losing out on the counterplan. We can still do the plan and the counterplan in the same world without losing out on this. In addition, this is not a policy round. The resolution does not give us an actor. It does not say the US federal government should do some policy action. It does not give a policy actor or a government. Thus, since this is not a policy resolution and we don't get access to a plan or a use of fiat, they should not either. In addition, we're going to argue that there could be some downsides. I'll get to in a sec. There could be some downsides to their counterplan. For example, sometimes the need may arise for patrol officers to have the use of lethal weapons in the event that they need to protect people or respond quickly to a threat. It can take 10 minutes for backup to get to a location, and that may not be enough time to respond to a threat because the people might be dead by then. Look to school patrol officers at a school. If you see that a school shooter is coming onto campus, you probably need to shoot them and do something about it rather than wait 10 minutes to call for backup because the Parkland shooting only took 6 minutes to kill 17 people. Yes?
So are you saying that basically the affirmation is just like a thought experiment imagining a world where we would have basically demographically represented?
We advocate for the resolution to happen. We do not have a plan or a use of a government actor because it's not in the resolution. And in order to affirm the resolution, we just advocate for what it is because it doesn't give us a specific actor that should be affirming it. Let's move on to the first disadvantage. So their disadvantage is about scarcity. They say right now there are police shortages in the United States and that there aren't enough people. Our argument is that they're not going to be hiring unqualified people of color or unqualified minorities. And remember, we're not just talking about people of color here. We're also talking about diversity in other forms, such as hiring more women into police forces because they're underrepresented. And I'm sure you can find plenty of women because they make up a little over 50% of our population. In addition, we're talking about things like religious diversity. People who are Muslim are often underrepresented in our police forces and people of other religions as well. And this can have negative effects on those populations. Yes?
Why aren't we hiring women now?
Because, like, for example, they don't see women as more qualified and they don't think they have to hire women. So if they don't think they have to hire women or there's no mechanism saying that they have to hire women, a lot of people see men as more qualified because of the implicit sexism in our society. However, we tell you that you have to reflect the demographics of the population, and that means that about 50%, like as much as possible, should be women. We're not saying, like, setting a hard line. We're just saying as much as is possible in these communities, the police forces should reflect the demographics of the community. We're not going to be leaving vacant positions. For example, if there are vacant positions, like, we're not just firing the white people to make up for the diversity. What we're doing is we're adding more people to the police forces. And in addition, we would not be hiring any unqualified people. They have to go through a screening process and background checks to even become a police officer, and then undergo lots of intensive training. They say that there's going to be increased court training and increased brutality, but we argue that there's no reason we can't also put more money into training, because if you need to train more people, you're probably just going to put funding into training those more people. And the police are an incredibly well-funded branch of our government right now, especially because Trump wants to be the law and order president. In addition, they say there's a lot of scarcity, but that's only in some areas of the country. The scarcity does not apply to the entirety of the United States. And we would argue that we would like to turn this argument of being police effectiveness, because if there's so many police who are not trusted, the police department is ineffective. By putting more diversity in demographics into the police department, what we're going to be seeing is that they will be trusted more and be more effective, and then you don't need to have as many police officers when the police officers become more effective and have more diverse ideas and perspectives about how to handle these problems. That means we don't have to hire as many people, and we don't have to hire unqualified people, because the police we have are becoming more effective and more efficient. Okay, let's move on to their second disadvantage of segregation. They say that people of color deal with brutality. Yes, they do. But our argument is on the uniqueness that they say the status quo is bad right now. They say that people are dying right now because of police brutality. We tell you that police are disproportionately white males right now, and they don't respond to this. The status quo is bad. It is failing. They say, oh, the plan is just going to make it so people of color aren't comfortable in some areas where there's a majority of white police. But we tell you people of color aren't comfortable anywhere right now, because everywhere there are white police, and everywhere police do not represent these people of color, and everywhere police do not represent these underrepresented minorities. Our argument is that the status quo is bad. In either world, people of color will not feel comfortable in some communities. But in our world, at least we decrease the amount that happens. We increase the amount of representation for these people in some communities so they feel safe on the streets, even in communities where they are the majority, where currently white people make up the entirety of the police force. So really what you're seeing is that although the people we don't solve for the complete issue, we at least take a step in the right direction, whereas they do nothing. Let's move on to the affirmative case. No need to talk about weighing because they agree. On contention 1, they say that the plan is going to increase police brutality. I've already made a response to this, which is that no, the plan is not going to increase police brutality because we're increasing the effectiveness of the police force. And their contention doesn't really make sense. Also, I made an argument that we can put more funding into training and that everyone has to undergo these training programs. In addition, they argue that people of color will be selected based on how much they buy into the system and that they won't necessarily create less racism. But again, right now, people are being selected into how much they buy into the system. Right now, these problems are occurring. They do not do anything to solve this, and we perm their counterplan anyway. At least we're decreasing the amount of discrimination that is happening. At least we're doing something to solve for this issue. People of color do not have implicit biases against other people of color. They can also empathize with each other because they have felt discrimination themselves and know what it feels like, and are therefore more aware when discrimination occurs and can try to check themselves and prevent that discrimination. We're not saying no people of color are going to make police brutality happen. We're just saying we're decreasing it by a substantial amount by having more understanding and empathy within them and less psychological, implicit, subconscious bias. On contention 2, their only response is just if these people of color are surrounded by white supremacists, they'll become white supremacists too. This is bogus. If you think for a minute, people of color would not do something that is not in their own interest most of the time. If they are surrounded by white supremacy, do you really think that they would become white supremacists if they are not white themselves? This argument makes fundamentally no sense. They do not have to adopt the mindsets of the people in this community. And in addition, we're going to turn this argument and argue that if people of color are incorporated into the system, white people will be exposed to them and their views more and see them as regular people and then decrease white supremacy. They don't respond to the rest of this contention. Please flow it through. On contention 3 of diversity, they say black people will be silenced and that they'll still be in the minority. The first response is that they are not in the minority everywhere, but they are in the minority of the police departments pretty much everywhere. Even in cities with high populations of people of color, white people dominate the police stations. Also, they have no warrant that black people will be silenced, and we argue they'll be listened to more. On contention 4, they just made another argument that they made earlier on the flow about people of color don't necessarily solve, but I've just responded to this multiple times. For all of these reasons, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot today.
First things first, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out and making this possible. Really appreciate it. I'm just gonna go in the same order: counterplan, disadvantages, nothing on framework, then their 3 advantages in order. Everyone set? All right. So starting off on the counterplan, first you're going to do both, and the response here is just pretty much going to be that this is being run as an advanced counterplan. Like, so it's theoretically possible to simultaneously do these 2 actions, but there's going to be no reason why you would ever consider doing that for a couple of reasons. They say that we have to prove competition. Essentially, we have to prove that it's impossible to do both of these things. But the competition here is going to come through the disadvantages. Essentially, the counterplan is a way of achieving the solvency of the affirmation while avoiding the 2 main issues they create. It's a way of decreasing police brutality while simultaneously not increasing segregation and not increasing scarcity and increasing the violent tendencies of police officers. Essentially, you're reducing death due to police actions while avoiding the 2 impacts before we encompass all of their solvency and none of their harms. So it's an advantage counterplan. This is a really basic argument in debate. I'm being run all the time. The purpose doesn't function here because the 2 disadvantages create competitiveness. Then moving into their first response that like to say that they don't get fiat because there's no actor in their plan, so we shouldn't either. Just look at ours the exact same way. There's no actor in our plan either. We're just saying patrol officers should be deemed lethal weaponry. They're approaching the scene with the exact same action. If they don't get fiat 2, then they lose access to any sort of solvency. They haven't run this as some sort of moral thought experiment. They've run it as actually achieving solvency. So if they just don't get access to any fiat or any post-fiat impacts, then they pretty much lose everything in their case. You're just evaluating these 2 in the exact same way. It's not like we're running the USFG should. We're approaching the exact same methodology. Then they say they need to respond quickly. And look at the fact that there's been 300 deaths so far this year due to police brutality and only 50 in the last 2. This is just basic impact calculus. We're looking at police brutality being a much, much larger epidemic. And then look at the fact that the police haven't been able to respond quick enough to any of these mass shootings in the first place. It's not like they're solving now. You can't solve less somehow. It's already not working. So we just need to prioritize the bigger impact and prioritize ending these 300 people that have already been murdered just in this year alone, and we're not even halfway through the year yet. So that's just going to be a bigger impact. Moving into the first disadvantage of scarcity, you make the point that we're just not going to hire unqualified people because there's screening processes. There's screening processes now. If it was possible, if police wanted to screen out violent people, they would be doing it now. Just look at the fact additionally that if you have to meet a certain quota of a certain group, you're just going to have to hire anyone who applies. Either there's pretty much a double bind here. Either they don't have enough people to solve because they're just hiring majority white people anyway because they just need to fill the positions, or they're looking into this disadvantage because they're hiring just violent people. They're just taking anyone who applies. If they say that you can need a certain number of people from Asian American backgrounds, they're just going to hire anyone who applies, even if that person is consistently shown anti-blackness or anti-black opinions. They're just going to be forced to hire them. They're just going to find women. The fact that women aren't applying now just shows that they're not going to have any solvency. They can't just declare that all of a sudden this is going to make them start applying to the police force.
They literally would be hiring them because they need more people.
Yeah, they would be hired because they need more people. It's just going to be more people with violent tendencies. It could be women with deeply racist beliefs. It's not like women are immune to racism whatsoever. Then they say they have to be screened. This is the status quo. It's not working now. Next, they say that if they put more money into training, if training could solve racism, we would have a completely different police force. These are things that are ingrained to us over our entire lives. Just like one year of school isn't going to undo that. Then next, they talk about putting more people and putting people more diversity that makes them more effective. They just make the idea that people of color are completely exempt to racism. You can be, say, Asian American and have anti-black thoughts, or the other way around, or you could be you could identify as female and be deeply racist as well. It's not like just having people of color all of a sudden makes everyone exempt to racism. Moving into the second disadvantage. Moving into the second disadvantage of segregation, they say people are killing, police are killing people now because they're white. First, just look at the fact that people of color aren't exempt from racism. They just kind of flatten people of color into one large group where everyone identifies the same. Asian American people won't kill African American people. There's just no warrant for this whatsoever. With the way white supremacy is constructed in the United States, with the whole model minority myth, there's just deep examples of people of white civil society breeding anti-blackness into other minority groups to maintain the status quo. So we're not going to see any solvency here. It's not just white people who are racist, and it's not just men who are racist. I think there'll be examples too that are not going to have any solvency. And they say people of color are uncomfortable everywhere. First, they can't ignore the fact that they're going to be making some areas more white. There's large amounts of area of the United States that are just predominantly white. Let's use Portland as an example. We're just sitting in Oregon. It's over 80% white, and that means that it's representative of the population is going to have an 80% white police force. That means that there's just going to be areas that are continually white, and the counterplan's going to solve better, so they're not really going to fix this, and the counterplan will fix it better. Moving on to the third case, starting with the first advantage. First, in response to our cross-application of the first disadvantage, they say it's not going to get worse, it's going to get better. This isn't really a response at all. They've given you warrant for wildlife. You're just going to have, when you have to hire, say, 20 Asian American individuals, you're just going to have to accept anyone you can under their requirements. And even if that person has shown like deeply misogynistic or deeply racist tendencies, they're still going to be happy to put in the police force. Like there's no ability to like screen and make sure that you get like the best people, the people who will actually be best for the world. You're just going to have to accept anyone, even if that person has shown like maybe a history of domestic violence, what 40% of police officers have. You're just going to have to accept people. And they say that like, or then they just talk about how like, are they going to put that people of color can be violent too? Like they say people get accepted by how they buy it. They say like that's the status quo. But the fact is like if you're a person of color who understands like how deeply racist police officers are, the police force in the United States is, you're not going to be applying to join it. Like why would you try to join something that's committed and continuously killing people who you identify with? So it's just going to be people of color who already like somehow don't have understanding of these racial tensions. And I say that there's no implicit bias in people of color. This is just factually untrue. Like I've talked throughout this speech about how people of color can have implicit biases both against their own race due to like white supremacy that's ingrained into them, and people of color can have bias against other groups, other racial groups. So there's really no reason to think that like people of color are just immune to any sort of violence or any sort of racism. And it's shows the fact like they talk about it could be women too. Women could be be racist. Men of color could be misogynistic. Like it's not like any marginalized group is perfect to every marginalized group. They don't have any solvency here whatsoever at all. Moving into their second disadvantage of profiling. So they talk about how like my partner made a point about how it's surrounding people with white supremacy terms, and they say this is like completely bogus. They're not going to act out of their self-interest. And again, they have this idea that like all people of color, or just all marginalized people, are just one group as a whole, which is just factually untrue. Like maybe it's like they are hiring a woman or a person who is white and identifies as female, like and put them into a white supremacist system. They're going to become more. It's going to increase racism as well, or it could increase misogyny with men of color. It can increase anti-blackness with Asian individuals. It can increase anti-Asian sentiment with Black individuals. Like it's not like there's just one group called people of color, one group called marginalized individuals. You can increase it across. And additionally, like there's tons of examples of people who identify as a racial group and hold deeply and hold opinions against it. It's just ingrained into people through decades and centuries of white supremacy. It's not exempt. You're not exempt to racism whatsoever. And then like not all people of color are the same. Then they see like this exposure of people of color is going to like make white officers somehow not racist. If like working with one or two people of color was enough to undo racism, like we wouldn't have a racist society. Like it's not going to outdo your entire life being deeply into a white supremacist system and just being taught this over and over again. Like it's not like just like meeting one person of color is the cure to racism. There's no argument for why that would happen at all. Moving into this third advantage, they talk about how like a diverse group allows for like better solvency. Then my partner made the point that it's going to silence like racist individuals. It's not like there's going to be like enough people of color in the majority of situations to have like the majority. It's still going to be majority white. It's still going to be majority dominant culture. There's going to be no solvency whatsoever. And additionally, like it's not like just having like a bunch of Asian American individuals is all of a sudden going to solve like for anti-blackness perfectly. Diversity is not all the same. Moving into the fourth and final advantage, they talk about how like people are profiled now and it puts like putting people of color in law enforcement stuff. Once again, like all people of color are the same. There can still be like anti-blackness within Asian individuals, to be misogyny within men of color. It's not just going to solve this. It's still going to be profiling just because they don't really have any solvency. They go the example with like Ben Carson. He's deeply doing things that are anti-black, even though he's black himself. It's possible to hold these beliefs even if you identify with a specific race. So for those reasons, I urge an affirmative vote in the negation vote. Thank you so much.
I guess you know your first word is. Alright, this will be, I'm just going to signpost as I go down the line and then just get into some impact factors. Alright. Before we begin, I just want to extend one final thing truly to everyone at being, because it's very likely the last speech I give on high school debate circuit, so I just want to thank everyone for making this possible for me. Okay, so let's start here on the permutation. Basically, my partner talked about this already. I just want to clarify like the disadvantages of the reason not to vote on the permutation. So if you don't buy the disadvantages, then like sure vote on the permutation. But basically, you're looking at like would you want to do something that's good and bad, or something that's only good. So obviously, if they win the disadvantages, then this is going to be a debate. So let's go talk about the disadvantages because that's what we're going to have to win this round. One thing I want to point out here is that basically looking at structural violence was their framework on how we need to weigh this round. So the first thing they talked about, they made this argument of like disarming police is actually going to make things worse because of like school shootings and all that. That doesn't link anywhere into like structural violence. So that's just not even something that we need to weigh in this round. That you're going to prefer the actual lives that that we're saving through the range of like shootings that would be decreased over the like school shooting stuff. That's just not something that's going to link, even if you think that like in a different framework that would outweigh. So that's just the first thing I'm going to want to clarify here is that's the framework that we're looking through. And That's going to get me out of the scarcity disadvantage. So the first thing is that you can extend the partner's argument, especially the double bind. Basically, the point that I just really want to extend on here is that current screening just doesn't work very well. Like in the unique thing, right now, the current screening isn't functioning well because you see a ton of racist police officers. So their answer to that was basically like, well, we'll just put more money into the system to make sure that like screening will be better. And so now they're spending more money on things, which is going to be problematic. Like you're just putting more money into this already overblown police system, while the actual disarming police would actually save money, which would be pleasant. But the reality here is that what they're doing is that they're putting people through this system, and no matter how much money you put in onto this, they're not going to be able to fix the institutional racism that is in the training itself. When they talk about like background checks, they talk about the checks that are on there that are obviously not working right now. There's no reason to believe that they would work if you just like make more of them, basically. So all you're going to see is you're going to be extending the impacts that we've and over there, you're going to see an increase in the death of marginalized people because you're going to have poor training. Even if you're putting more women, they're just going to be the board. They're going to be choosing the women who are going to be racist. And you're putting people of color who have been impacted by the hegemonic instance of white supremacy in the status quo. Like that's how hegemony works. Is like you co-opt people to like go for their own oppression, even if they don't believe in it. And so that's just going to be what you're going to see happen more and more and more. Here, there are little dash cam videos of black police officers pinning black people to their cars while the white police officer harasses them. Like this is just how it works. Like they need job security, and if they can buy into the system, even if it's not something that tangibly benefits their own people, it's something that they just buy into. And so the reality is that it's just much easier to co-opt someone to think that they're doing a good thing and accidentally act against their own race instead of change an institutional viewpoint of like you've grown up your entire life not thinking that black people are equal to white people. Let's go on to the segregation disadvantage. Basically, you're just going to see like the counterplan solves this so much better. Like the counterplan, like what's going to be more safe, like having a few people that look like you in your community, or not having people around who can literally shoot you on a whim. Like that's the reality. Is the counterplan just does this a much better way than the affirmations plan, which is why like basically the only way that they have a chance of winning this round is on a permutation, because the counterplan just solves for all of the impacts of the affirmation much better than they do it. So if you buy this a single negative impact to the affirmations plan, then you're going to be voting for the negation here. If you buy that we're making it so it's going to be more unsafe for people of color to exist by implementing the plan, then that's going to be the reason to vote for the negation here. That's one final thing before I get into that calculus. Actually, I've got 30 seconds left. Damn. Let's just jump right into that calculus anyway. So basically, when you're going to be weighing things, you're going to be weighing this specifically on death of marginalized people. If we talked about the structural violence, that's what you're going to want to do. It's going to link it to decreasing poverty. And you see that the negation is the world that uniquely is going to solve for that issue, because putting people of color are just going to be corrupted. They're going to cause the same amount of issues. It's going to be just as bad, if not worse, because it's going to have the perception of making things better while things are actually worse. It's going to decrease the amount of stress on police officers, and it's going to basically like this victim complex, like, oh, well, we're doing so much better, and it's just going to cause more problems, while the counterplan is just removing the best that people use to destroy black people's lives. Voting.
Alright, just a last congratulations. This may be my last round with my awesome partner, so thank you guys for being awesome. Beginning time now. The negation makes a few key mistakes when they assume that women and minorities are just as likely to discriminate as white men. They concede three key arguments. First, people of color have less implicit bias towards others, and two, specifically, people who have felt discrimination are less likely to perpetuate this discrimination because they understand how it feels. And three, we don't claim that all discrimination goes away, but we're better than the status quo. Let's look at the fact that we do a lot of generalizing in this round of people in color, and it's not true that, of course, all people of color obviously have different implicit bias, but it's simply less likely to have implicit bias than an entire group of white police officers. Okay, move on to the disadvantages. On the issue of scarcity, our opponents tell you that screening doesn't work. Let's look at the fact that screening is not trying to screen against racism. They say screening doesn't work because police are still violent and racist. Screening is not trying to solve for racism. Screening is trying to see if police are actually physically qualified. That's their only warrant for why screening doesn't work. Screening does work to see if people are physically qualified also. They say that we're not going to have enough people of color in order to fill these positions. Let's look to the fact that based on the fact that it's reflecting the community. So in a community, if the majority of people are white, the majority of police officers are going to be white. That's like how it is now. But if the majority of the population, let's say, is black, then the majority of police officers, when they get replaced or added, will be black. This actually has a change. We're not like forcing a population that's very white to like have a lot of black police officers. We're forcing it to be proportionate to the population. They say there's not enough qualified minorities, but let's say you have a town where half people are black. There's probably like at least half the police force who are black are qualified to have that job. It's just bad to say otherwise that like these people aren't going to be qualified. Also, less than the fact that we tell you we do not have these strict quotas. When it's possible, we put the qualified people into jobs. Never put people who are completely unqualified because we have a screening process based on physical qualifications to be a police officer. So the screening argument simply doesn't make sense. Also, extend or no link. There's no reason we can't also put money into training. The police has a ton of money, and just like the fact that we don't have super great training, it's not a unique reason to vote against the affirmative happens in either world. All we have in our world is we put more people into areas where there's qualified people of minorities who are simply not have the ability to be in the police force. Okay, on to segregation. Basically, they just say that we don't have the ability to screen, but we do. We screen right now. We're not specifically screening for racism, we're screening for physical ability, right? Talk about this. Also, they say that people of color are not going to want to join a supremacist group. And that may be true. Probably not all people of color, because they're all different. Less of the fact that some people of color probably will because they want to make a change. They're upset with the way the police force works and they want a chance to be in this organization of power. Putting someone in a police position is giving them power. Lots of people of color want this to actually change the implicit bias that they face. Also, again, they say people of color can be racist, and that's true, but they're less likely than the entire majority of white people because white people haven't faced the same kinds of discrimination. Also, on to the counterplan. We say perm. They say we compete with the DAs. None of their DAs are actually standing right now. Less of the fact that there is not scarcity because it's proportional to the unique communities in each community, right? So also the issue of segregation, basically none of these arguments are flowing through because you've already responded that these people of color are less likely to be racist and are going to want to do something to change the system. So even if you buy that all the DAs actually still exist, we're going to be outweighing them with the impacts of the affirmative. However, they do not compete through net benefits because they do not solve for all the affirmative. We're the only team that solves the implicit bias you have in the police system. Without these weapons, you can still arrest minorities unfairly and do even more damage through society than these 300 people are shot. Yes, it's a big deal that 300 people were shot by police, but we're going to be outweighing that with the implicit bias that faced 1 in 3 African American men who expect to go to prison during his life. There's a lot more magnitude of these 300 people. Basically, yeah. Let's understand, all their uniqueness is that the status quo is bad. Because we perm their counterplan, they do no unique thing to make it better. They do not actually change the discrimination that people are facing. All they do is get rid of these weapons, but it's probably simply going to be white police officers who no longer have these weapons, and it's not going to do anything to change the world they tell you is bad. On to affirmation's case. They don't make a whole lot of responses. They just try to, again, cross-apply their disads. But let's go to the fact, the most important argument on the contention 1. They say that one racist person or meeting one person of color won't solve. And I agree, that's probably true. But let's look at the fact that many white supremacists don't have experience with people of color in their life. That means meeting a group of people of color could absolutely change their opinion. And more importantly, let's say there's an area where half of the population is people of color. That means half the police are people of color. If you have this 50-50 divide, there's a much higher chance of these white police officers being educated about these issues, and at least we can change some amount of racism in the system. And they change no amount of racism in the system. Also, on connection to racial profiling, basically, yeah, it's they say that the perception of police being bad is good because it gives them their counterplan. Just don't buy that. They have the counterplan anyways. Okay, so really quickly, they also never respond to the contention of surveillance as one unique thing they have absolutely no chance of solving because surveillance is not linked into these weapons. We're the only team that can solve the disproportionate discrimination of Muslims and Hispanics. So when you're weighing on structural impacts, we're very clearly going to be outweighing the very low probability impacts that they have that we're able to solve for the department. Thank you.